Hello and welcome to another episode of Threads of Conversation. Today my guest is one of fashion's most esteemed journalists, Alexander Fury. He's currently the fashion features director at large of *An0ther Magazine and men's critic at the Financial Times. He's previously held positions at New York Times' Tea Magazine, the independent newspaper, Vogue, Love Magazine and Nick Knight's Show Studio. He's also written 10 books on fashion and luxury and contributed to numerous exhibition catalogues. He's curated and consulted on many of the world's leading fashion exhibitions, including advising on the Victoria and Albert Museum's recent Naomi Campbell retrospective. But Fury's greatest achievement of all remains his ever-growing archive, where he's amassed over 3,000 pieces of clothing from some of fashion's most pivotal collections. The pieces have been featured in publications and exhibitions around the world and appeared in a Vogue documentary covering his extensive collection of John Galliano pieces. If you're listening to the audio version of this episode, a reminder that Threads of Conversation is now video too. You can watch it on YouTube or Substack, where you'll see pictures of Alex showing us some of the pieces from his archive. You can also see photos in the accompanying newsletter, which is linked in the show notes. Don't forget to follow Threads of Conversation on Instagram and TikTok, and like and subscribe on Substack, YouTube, Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or all of them if you really love the show.
So the piece which reminds you of your childhood, what have you chosen for this one?
So the piece that reminds me of my childhood is this. I did kind of like that everyone else has chosen t-shirts and sweatshirts and things, and I've got a corset. But it's the Vivienne Westwood corset. It's a famous one. I think everyone who kind of knows about fashion and knows about Westwood knows about this corset, but it's the Boucher corset that has this picture from the Wallace collection of the shepherd watching the sleeping shepherdess. And when I was a kid, there's an amazing documentary that's still on YouTube. It's called Painted Ladies, and it's a 3-part documentary that Vivienne made with her brother. And I just think it's incredible because she explains her entire process of designing. And she explained, for me, it was kind of like a how-to of being a fashion designer of, this is how she puts a collection together kind of thematically. And she talked a lot about the collection that this came from, which was Portrait from Autumn Winter 1990, which is a super important Vivienne collection. And it's a collection when she kind of introduced a lot of things that we associate with Westwood. It's the first time she used the high-heeled platform shoe. It's the first time she used the gold Rococo print that comes from the back of a mirror in the Wallace collection, and it's by Charles-André Boulle. And this corset had already been invented, but it is the first time she prints artworks on clothes. Because the whole idea was it was a collection that was about oil painting. And when she did all of the stuff around it, including all these kind of different textures that you find in oil paintings.
I wanted an actual photographic painting. And that is when I decided to choose the Boucher as being so typical and so pretty. And I had it printed on corsets.
She said the thing that was missing were the paintings themselves. And this was her favourite painting in the Wallace collection. And so she printed it on this. And so that's something I remember watching, and as you can tell, kind of memorising when I was a kid. And I always wanted this. It's something that, I think that I always loved. When I started buying clothes and consciously collecting, I would say this is one of the kind of early pieces that I saw for sale and was like, oh, I'm going to buy that. And I think a lot of my collecting is actually connected to my childhood, and it's about me collecting things I saw in magazines or things, I saw in videos or photographs of fashion shows. So there's very much that focus on the sort of mid to late 90s, early 2000s, because that's when I first became aware of fashion and fell in love with it. And so there's a real sort of strong bond to those particular items.
So tell me a bit about your childhood, where you grew up, how you got into fashion.
I grew up just outside of Manchester, but in the countryside. So I always remember when I went to university, I first went to university in Manchester, and someone kind of said they got the train and ended up going through kind of the village that I was coming from. And they were like, there was a town and then kind of, some countryside and then a smaller town and then more countryside. And then they were like, and then it was like countryside. And there was this station that was a shack in the middle of nowhere. And they were like, and that's where you're from. I don't know where the fashion thing came from completely. It's not, no one in my family works in fashion, and no one's really that interested in fashion. It was very evident, very, very young that I was obsessed with clothes when I was like 5 or 6. And then it became an obsession with fashion when I sort of discovered what fashion was. And I always remember I would buy Vogue, Harper's and Tatler because they were the ones that Adina mentioned in Absolutely Fabulous. And whenever I realized the collections were happening, I was buying newspapers. But that, you know, all of a sudden there would be fashion in a newspaper, and then I would be buying 5 newspapers a day. So it was something I was obsessed with, but I have no idea where it came from.
And were your family kind of supportive of that? Because I feel like you hear a lot of stories, particularly men in fashion or who were into it at a young age. They're like, oh, I was reading Vogue under the covers, you know, hiding them from my family.
Yeah, I think my parents were very accommodating. And again, it was sort of like there was no choice. I was like, it was just like, this is what he's obsessed with. And if we don't let him do this, and if we don't talk to him about this, there's nothing else to talk about. There's nothing else to do. I always had a really good relationship with my parents. I love my parents because everyone loves their parents, but I also like them as people. I always say I was basically who I am now back then. But being who I am now in London in the 21st century is very different to being who I am in, rural Lancashire in the 90s. A lot of, like I said, what I collect, what I'm obsessed with, there is this kind of nostalgia for that moment as well, just because it was super important to me. It's sort of what formed who I am. So it's quite natural that I'm drawn back to those clothes and to those designers, those kind of fashion moments. And also they were great. I'm like, I do have a lot of nostalgia for them. And, when I was a kid, I thought they were amazing. And I look back at them now and I'm like, I still think these are incredible.
And so you went from that passion for fashion and you wanted to become a fashion designer, is that?
Originally, yes.
And can you talk about that journey from wanting to become a fashion designer and then how you kind of branched off and headed into the world of fashion journalism?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I originally, that sort of the trajectory I wanted was to be a designer and to go to St. Martin's. There was Galliano, but there was also, McQueen, there was Hussein Chalayan, Antonio Berardi. There were a lot of people who'd gone through that system. And so I decided I wanted to go to St. Martin's when I was 12. And then I went to do my foundation course and just realized I didn't want to do it. It was, I think it was the way you had to do it. I didn't like working in that way. I also just don't think, in retrospect, and, I can be a harsh critic, I didn't think I was good enough. Like, when I look at it now, I'm like, I didn't want to be a fashion designer. I wanted to be John Galliano. Writing was always something that came really easily to me. And so after my foundation course in Manchester, I ended up taking 2 years out just to assess what I wanted to do. And so when I found that there was this course that was fashion history and theory, I was like, well, this is perfect. I remember talking to my classmates and, saying, how did you end up coming here? And they were like, oh, my kind of guidance counselor told me I should try this, and then I was the one being like, I've wanted to be here since I was a zygote.
So that leads us quite nicely onto your second piece. So this is the piece that reminds you of your career. We've actually got 2 of them here.
Yes, because I'm wearing one and this, which is kind of...
very unexpected choice.
A bit of a piss take. Which is, this black Sunspell t-shirt, which I think... I'm not going to hold it up any longer. You don't need to see it anymore. But I think everybody who knows me knows it's what I wear. And in a way, some people kind of question that because it's like you have all this amazing stuff that you've collected and you're exposed to all this amazing stuff and you write about it all. But I find a uniform really useful. I find it really useful, number one, because you don't have to think about it when you're on day 47 of 52 days of fashion shows. Mm-hmm. I also find it very useful because it allows you to kind of disappear in sort of very useful ways. Something I always remember is I did a backstage thing at an Armani show that was it was around Armani beauty. And so I went backstage and it was me and a lot of beauty journalists. And and we saw them kind of do the makeup, And then because it was beauty journalists, they weren't really interested in the clothes. And I was like, well, can I go and see the clothes? Can I go and see that part? And they were a bit like, oh, yeah, okay, if you really want to. And I ended up staying there for like 2 hours. And that's because I was wearing a black T-shirt and no one noticed me. So I just kind of stood quietly in a corner and got to see the amazing sort of... I mean, that was extraordinary, I think, because Mr. Armani works in a very particular way. And... honestly, it was like a scene out of like the court of Louis XIV or something. Mr. Armani wanted something. There was this sort of swell of people that would all rush to get it for him. There's all this stuff in Versailles of people wanting to hold the candle for the king when he's taking his shirt off and things like this. And I was just like, oh my God, it's so that. It was such an amazing thing to see. And I got to see it because I wasn't being flashy. And that's the other thing as well. I think, there are different designers, people like Azzedine and Pia Paolo. They're the two that jump to mind. They always all wear black. And they're like, well, I don't want to be distracted. It's like, it's not about me. It's not about what I'm wearing. It's my focus is outward. And I think the same for me as well. I think, for instance, I'm very different to a stylist or a fashion editor. When a stylist or a fashion editor goes to a fashion show, the way they put themselves together is part of their kind of brand. It's part of what they're selling is, for want of a better way of putting it, look how fabulous I am. You could have this if you, employ me, if you give me your shoot, if you give me your campaign. Whereas I think for me, this is a way of me kind of retreating back a little bit and being like, it's not about me. I think you can also play into people's ego where it's, you're making them the center of attention and the focus of attention. But also, it shouldn't be about me. It's not about me. It's about the clothes and the designers. It's about everything that I'm observing. My boyfriend tells me I look much nicer in a white T-shirt, but I walk around in a notebook with a pen on it. And when I did try and wear a white T-shirt, I ended up with like a doodle over sort of, along my diaphragm.
I want to go back to this idea you were talking about being able to be invisible in the black T-shirt. So even though you're able to be invisible, obviously as a critic, like your voice, it speaks volumes in the industry and you have a very distinctive voice. And I was listening to another interview with you and you were saying that you had potentially burned a few bridges in the past by being quite critical, which is obviously something we need more of in fashion, but it's not always welcomed by the comms teams of various houses. Did that take a certain, did you have to build up to being that brave? Have you become less critical now? What is your relationship?
No, I went in really hard as soon as I started. And actually it was kind of good because I think when I started very young, not very young, but when I was very green when I started writing stuff at Show Studio. And I think it actually got a lot of attention because I was quite forceful with opinions. Now, sometimes I look at things and my eyebrows shoot up and I'm like, wow. And it's not, I think it's also understanding the politics of the industry as a whole, whereas sometimes you can say things and they can be true. It can be how you really feel, but it can be incredibly difficult for someone else to read that. And I can read some of the things I wrote and I'm like, this is not a nice thing to have written. And I used to say, especially when I was at The Independent, because I saw what I was doing at The Independent was very much for a non-fashion audience. I would say really dreadful things to kind of get a laugh because I thought they were funny. And sometimes, you read it back and I still think a lot of them are funny. But I can understand why people would get insulted or would take it personally. A lot of people took what I wrote very, very personally and saw it as kind of personal attacks as opposed to comments on clothes. And that, that was a learning curve as well. I think now also writing for the Financial Times, it's a very different audience as well. It's, it's a more conservative audience, I think. And you do have to be aware of that. I remember there was one season where I was like, okay, I need to get all my reviews of the other shows over in 300 words because I want 600 words about Rick Owens because it's the best thing I've ever seen. And I know the comments from the Financial Times readers will be, what the hell is this? You know, like, is this a joke? Because they don't necessarily understand that.
Reading Rick hate online is probably one of my favourite pastimes. Just people are like, who is this Satan worshipper? Like, people
just so much, but also fashion. It's so like the Rick hate, Victoria Beckham at the Independent. Anything I wrote about Victoria Beckham, there would be like vitriol, really, really like horrendous, and it actually made me sort of I didn't have like a problem with Victoria Beckham, but it certainly made me way more sympathetic to her when I'm like, wow, the fact that I write something about you that is even vaguely complimentary, and the kind of bile that gets spewed at you, and the fact that you're having that X number of times, it made me realize how tough she must be as a person to cope with that. When I was at the New York Times, I had a meeting with the then executive editor who was saying, we're not sure people really care about criticism anymore. There are certain realms where criticism does affect, and then there are realms where it doesn't, because there's certain product that is made for, an uncritical audience. I always thought what Eddie did at Saint Laurent was very interesting in that respect, because the critics absolutely hated it, and it was the best-selling thing in fashion. And it proved how kind of impotent criticism was, in the way that in the past, if Suzy Menkes panned a show in the 90s, buyers would cancel orders. But with what Eddie was doing at Saint Laurent, people would pan it and no one cared. Like, it carried on selling, buyers carried on buying it, consumers carried on buying it. It ultimately was like, is this kind of an echo chamber just for the fashion industry? I always say I could be a really harsh critic because I loved fashion so much, and I would get really irritated when I saw bad fashion. And also, if you're putting it on this pedestal, to be judged, I'm going to judge it. Like, that's my job. Your job is to make great fashion, and my job is to tell you whether I think it's good or not. But I always say, the flip side of that is I can understand it's a little bit like someone inviting you around to their house and you say, well, yeah, your curtains are ugly and your canapes are shit. I can then understand them saying, we're not going to invite you back again. So that's, so when I got kind of banned from different shows, I was a bit like, well, yeah, I kind of understand it,
Can I ask which shows you got banned from?
I was banned from Jean-Paul Gaultier. And then we had a very nice kind of sort of détente meeting. I was banned from Dolce & Gabbana for a while. And that was quite, that was a quite sturdy ban, because it's when I went to American Vogue, and American Vogue said, no, we don't think this will be a problem. I said, we have some issues. They don't like things I've written about the show in the past. They're like, we're American Vogue, it's fine. And they phone me up, they're like, nope, they hate you. They're not letting you in. I was also banned from Saint Laurent. But I'm not banned from anything. I was banned from Mosquito. God, there's like an endless thing now. I also think at the moment, there's a lot of vitriol online. There's a lot of people who want to say, who have opinions, and it's fine to have an opinion, but I sometimes think it can be very sort of sledgehammer. And I'm not sure how valuable that is, truthfully. Fashion is kind of multifaceted. And even if I don't like it, a lot of the time I can be like, well, I don't like this, but I can see the validity of it. I can see who it's for, and I can see the point of it and how it's enriching a house or enriching a business.
All right, let's move on to your third piece. So your third piece is a piece that reminds you of a high. So what have you chosen for this?
When people ask me what I would save in a fire, I often say this, and people get a bit disappointed because it's a very beautiful black wool coat, but it's not a sort of ball gown or something super impressive. It's a coat by Azadine Alaïa. I met Azadine in 2015 when Azadine was releasing a perfume and also had an exhibition in Rome. So he was at the Galleria Borghese in Rome. And I interviewed him for the first time then. And he was incredibly difficult.
When you say difficult?
Well, I can't remember what the first question was. I should have researched it, but it was something about his work. It said something, your work.
Did you ask him what his inspiration was?
No. I wasn't that stupid. But I said something about work. And he said, I don't like to talk about my work. And I was like, well, I'm screwed. And then for some reason, it all turned around and we kind of fell in love with each other. And it was about the perfume. And then apparently he told me later, he was like, you do know that after that, I cancelled all the other interviews. It's like, there was supposed to be, I think, 3 or 4 interviews that day. And it was like, I did the interview with you, cancelled all the other interviews. So also, like, just because I love telling Azadine stories, there was also a thing with the French, you might not be able to use this, but I'll tell you. There was a thing with the French ambassador. So the French ambassador to Italy was at the dinner for Azadine for the exhibition launch, and they were sat on the same table. And Azadine was slagging off, I can't remember the name of the president. And Azadine, and she said, I am the representative of the president. And Azadine said, well, fuck the president and fuck you too. And then she had a dinner for him the next night. And the guy that curated the exhibition was like, so Azadine's really tired because he was going up and down the stairs all day. So he's so tired and he can't come to the dinner tonight. He's really sorry. And everyone was like, we all saw this argument the day before. We know why he's not coming. And so anyway, that interview was when I first met Azadine. And then he liked the interviews that I wrote based on it. And he said, you should come and stay with me when you're in Paris. And I didn't. And then I saw him and he said, you've not been staying with me in Paris. And I said, I thought it was rude for me to ask. And he said, it's rude you've not come. I said, you can't tell an English person they're rude. I'm completely mortified. So from then on, I stayed with him every time I was in Paris until he passed away. And the coat, I went to Azadine's shop on Rue Marignan. So just off Avenue Montaigne. So I went into that boutique and I tried on a bunch of coats and I loved this coat. And I was a bit like, okay, I'm going to go move some money around so I come back and buy this coat. And it was during Fashion Week. And then I went back. And I don't know how he knew that I'd been there and tried it on. But I saw him and he was like, I've got a present for you. No, I've got something to show you. And I went into a room and he had this coat. And it's like, oh, I know you want it. And I have no idea how he knew. And then he was like, I tried it on and he's like, okay, well, we need to fit it on you. It doesn't fit. And so he got one of the tailors in, but he was moving the buttons on the coat. So it wasn't like fully fitted to me, but he moved all the buttons around. And then he I was heavier then. He rubbed my stomach and he was like, and I was like, yeah, because you're feeding me every time I'm here. I'm like, this is why I've like put on about 3 stone from staying with you. And then I went and had lunch with him. And then when I came back, they moved the buttons and fitted it. And yeah, and it was absolutely, and it was in the room where he does the fittings, kind of the cabine where he does the fittings. And there's the Julian Schnabel. There's a Julian Schnabel of Azadine on this wall and another Julian Schnabel of Azadine on that wall, the kind of the smash plate portraits. And it's this room where there is the backstage when he used to do the shows there, and he lent that space to Vivian and it was backstage. So it's this whole, when the atelier is above. So it was this whole kind of out of body experience of, oh my God, I'm like, Azadine Alaïa is fitting a coat on me in this space. Whenever I was with him, I kind of sat at the kitchen table at like 4 a.m. A lot of the time I was the last person there with him, also because I was staying there with him. So it would be me, him, and either Carla Cezanne, who I absolutely love, or Carleen Surf, who I love as well. And they would help translate because Azadine didn't speak English and I don't speak French. And yeah, we'd be sat there at like 4 a.m. until 4 a.m. kind of talking. And I was always like, I can't believe I'm sat here with you talking about fashion and that you kind of give a shit about what I have to say on it. It's Azadine Alaïa. It's like, he's like Balenciaga. And so for me, it's representative of that relationship with him, which was incredibly important and kind of pivotal for me. And it just, he was an incredible designer, like the greatest, but also it's like just the most wonderful human being. I had such an amazing a very, very short period with him, because it was really only 2 years, just over 2 years until he passed away. But it's something that was really precious to me.
It definitely feels like he would choose people that he really valued and become almost like this paternal figure. Look at when you have all these stories of Naomi living at his house, and his house also being this locus of creativity.
But also just this amazing thing of you never knew who was going to be there. You know, I always remember, you know, just being there and Monica Bellucci was there. And I didn't know who she was because, like, you know, when do you ever go to a kitchen and see Monica Bellucci sat in the corner? And she was pissed off that I didn't know who she was. You know, he had a fierce loyalty to other people and everyone had this fierce loyalty to him. The last thing he asked before he passed away is if I would write the text for the Design Museum show. And then very graciously, the Design Museum did keep me on to do that. And I was an absolute nightmare because Azadine would have been an absolute nightmare. Yeah, so that's Azadine.
So I got this book out. So this book, put it in so that you can see it. It features not only you and your collection, but also Azadine's collection.
I think one of my favourite anecdotes is in there, which I love, which is very much from a collecting point of view, was that an auctioneer told me that he said to her, okay, when this comes up, you know, when this comes up for auction, phone me. But say you're Mrs. Smith phoning for Azadine about a dress. Mm-hmm. He said, when you get on the phone, that's what you've got to say. And that was because if she said she was XOX from Sotheby's, the people in the studio would put the phone down because they wanted him to stop buying clothes. And then obviously it was like, it's Mrs. Smith calling for a dress. And then they passed it to Azadine. And Azadine's just, they're going, yes, because he's bidding up, you know, it's like, and no one else knew, which is something, again, that I think we shared, this obsessiveness about fashion, and also this kind of, you know, the obsession becomes about possession as well, and this idea of wanting to have these things and appreciating them as objects and turning them inside out.
All right. The piece which reminds you of a low probably would remind everyone else of a high if they owned this piece.
This is, I mean, it's still got the label on as a kind of indication of, it never being worn, at least by me. So this is a Chanel jacket. It's from spring, summer 2006, but it was bought much more recently. And I bought this jacket because the designer Stefano Pilati has this jacket. And there's an amazing picture of him wearing it with like white jeans and a coat over the top and looking so incredibly chic. And I've seen it a few times and I've never seen it in a size that would be big enough for me to wear. And then I saw this one and I was like, oh my God, this, you know, I can get this. I can realize this dream I've always had. I'm going to be able to look like Stefano Pilati and blah, 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 blah. I got it, I put it on, I looked like Nancy Reagan. I was like, I can't, this is so horrible. And I interviewed Stefano a few months after, and I said I'd got it, and he went, oh, don't, you just feel the chicest. Doesn't this jacket just make you feel the chicest? And I said, no, it makes me feel like Nancy Reagan. And it's that kind of thing, which I think is, when you work in fashion, there is a lot of the time those realizations of, oh, this looks amazing on this person. It's going to look great on me. And then you get it on you and you're like, oh my God, I look horrific. Mm-hmm. And I get that quite a lot because I'm 5'7". You know, it is difficult in fashion that you're sat there looking at incredibly beautiful people that look in incredibly beautiful clothes that have been made to look absolutely perfect. And that's the whole thing of the industry. And then you feel like you look, you know, like a cross between Jabba the Hutt and a sausage roll. And, you know, it's very difficult. I also think, you know, I cover men's, women's, couture, you know, all the different elements. So it's, it's this kind of coming to terms with your own image, I think. And even after a long time in fashion and a long time in my body, There are still blips, and this was a significant. It wasn't that expensive, but it's a kind of significant blip. It's still something where it's like, oh, I would love to look this way, but I can't. I mean, there was a day I remember, which is kind of a low becoming a high, which I remember having a day where I felt really sort of physically awful. And it was a Prada resort. It's Prada's first resort show, which was in Milan. And I had this fabulous Prada coat that I still have, which is from spring 2018. It's grey wool, and it's got ostrich feathers down the front. It's a women's coat, very fine grey wool. And I was literally like, I feel like shit, I don't want to wear anything. And then like, you know what? I was like, fuck it, I'll put it on. It's nice. I put it on and then kind of looked at myself in the mirror in the lift. And I was like, no, I look okay. And I went and everyone was like, oh, you look really nice, you look really nice. And I just heard this voice go, oh, bello eleganza. And it was Mrs. Prada.
Oh, no.
And I was like, and I've always said, I'm like, that is peak. This is peak career. Just run me over with a buzz now. It's not going to get any better than Mrs. Prada telling me I look elegant. I felt so awful about myself today. And this is completely, well, you know, 2 words from the chicest woman in the world. That was a very nice moment of feeling very down and then kind of, you know, going from a low to a high. It is horrible to say, but there's a lot of that in fashion where it is about, you know, feel bad about yourself and buy this and feel better is, you know, it's a lot of what the industry is built around that you're never supposed to say.
But I want to get on to talking about, I've got lots of questions about your archive. So let's move to the next piece, which we don't have here because it is so precious. Is it in an exhibition or something at the moment?
No, I lent it is just back from American Vogue. And I don't normally loan it for shoots, but it was American Vogue. And actually it's not because it was American Vogue, it's because it's Amanda Harlock. I absolutely love Amanda. And she, as I said to her when she was doing this shoot, she can have whatever she wants, especially Galliano, because she helped make it.
So what is the piece?
It's the piece that makes me feel part of something. And it is it's the dress that's known as the Carla dress from John Galliano's Autumn-Winter 1995 collection, which is called Dolores. I think everyone's bored of hearing me wang on about this dress because it's the dress that I talk about. It's in the American Vogue documentary they did on me. I always say it's the first piece of Galliano that I saw in a magazine. It's the thing that kind of triggered my obsession with Galliano. There's apparently 5 of them in the world. I think I've seen it for sale now for about £90,000. That is not what I paid for it. That is, you know, hundreds of times what I paid for it. But it's a very special thing. It's toss up between that and the Azadine for Wide Saving the Fire.
I want to ask you about this. So I feel like I was thinking about the way you talk about collecting and your obsession with fashion. And I feel like particularly now we're in an era where we really pathologize everything. So we're like, we see everything sort of, if you were to say I'm obsessed with something, that would seem like a problem. Yeah. And I want to ask about whether you've ever had to kind of reconcile with this sense of obsession, this compulsion, because also you talk about you don't have a specific end goal in terms of what you're collecting for, or have you ever grappled with your impulse to collect? Have you ever felt like, oh, I should stop, or I want to stop?
No, I mean, yes. Like every day I'm a bit like, oh, you know, it's a bit much. Physically, it's a bit fiscally, physically. But I think this is something I've said before. I'm not sure I've said it on record on a podcast or anything, because also she's not the best person to quote. But the Duchess of Windsor said this thing of the possession of beautiful things is thrilling to me. And I think that's what it's about. It's about being able to have a beautiful thing and to physically have it and be able to turn it inside out, look at the details, feel the weight of it. And the thing that I also like is then being able, you know, if someone wants to wear it, it's really fabulous seeing it on somebody and having a kind of life again. I really love that as well. You know, some of the stuff I buy and I do wear myself, it's not, I don't grapple with it in terms of, oh, is this, you know, should I be doing this morally? Is this something that I should be doing? You know, I've never questioned it. I do like to state it whenever I can. My family are not wealthy. I am not from generational wealth. It's also a very working class northern thing that if you make money, you spend it all. You don't save it. You're not responsible. You don't invest in anything. You spend it all, and spending it on clothes is quite a northern thing as well. So when I was a teenager, I used to do kind of housework for my parents, and I got paid an allowance for that. And actually it all went into like a share scheme in my mum's company, in the company my mother worked for. And at some point I got it paid back to me. So it was like a savings pot. I didn't get lots of money from it, but literally I got it all back, and my mum was like, well, you can use this to go to university with this money. And I was like, no, I'm buying clothes. And as soon as I had any money for anything else, I was like, I'd go and buy clothes with it. When I was a student, I used to work in an investment bank. That's how I paid my way through St. Martin's. And you used to be able to get a stipend for travel. So I used to get it and buy a pair of shoes. Like every season I would buy a pair of esteemed Dior shoes. That's what I did with it every year. And it wasn't even a question of like, oh, of course I'm going to buy clothes with this. This is what I do. So from the very start, there's been something that I've wanted to possess this. I mean, I think with this dress for me was very much about connecting with Amanda and connecting with, in an abstract way with John, and with this kind of vision of the world.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to contextualize for any of the audience who don't know who Amanda is, she was kind of John Galliano's right-hand woman and his muse for quite a long time. Yeah. And then she moved and she started working with Carl at Chanel, and she was basically by his side throughout most of his time.
Exactly. It was this kind of long-standing, very kind of symbiotic relationships with two of the greatest designers of our time. And, I think it's really fascinating. It also says a lot about Amanda and about her talent.
All right, let's move on to your next piece. So the next piece is the piece that reminds you of a great party.
Okay.
What have you chosen?
Well, I'm not sure I can count this as a great party, but I've chosen this piece, which it's Christophe Decanin.
I was going to say this. So this era of Balmain was like what? It was that sort of French Vogue, Corinne Roitfeld, Cool Girl, Emmanuel Alt.
So this isn't the collection with the Madonna soundtrack and what I always call the tennis ball shoulders, which I love that collection, and I love those tennis ball shoulders. This is the collection after, which had those pointed shoulders. Yeah, so this is from that era, that collection. I bought it on the 31st of December 2009 in the Selfridges sale.
Good old Selfridges sale.
Good old Selfridges sale. And that was when everything used to go to like 75% off, because also Balmain then was extortionately expensive.
I was going to say, so that was that era of Balmain really captured my imagination when I was a teenager. Yeah. And I always dreamed of owning something, and occasionally I'd look it up. And even as I got a bit older, even the secondhand pieces, I remember that ripped khaki t-shirt. It was like 2K or something.
Yeah, I bought this because it was 75% off or something. I wore it that New Year's and have very hazy memories of it because I got very drunk very quickly, as often happens. But one of the few memories I have of it was that I got into a fist fight over wearing this, that someone had challenged me about it. And I don't really know the context of it, but I do know that I was in a fist fight with a bunch of people. And I was saying to someone like, oh, great, so I got beaten up. And they were like, no, you held your own. They were like, no, you were more than kind of standing up to like three guys. But I did get like one of my front teeth chipped, which is still chipped to this day. But yeah, that I was defending the honour of this fabulous cape that
Wait, so someone said, "Oh, I don't like your jacket."
I don't know. I don't really know. I just know that it was. They said something about your cape, and that was what happened. So I'm not sure if it's a good night, but it was certainly a night out.
A night to remember.
Yes, a night to remember. Exactly. Yeah.
A night to be informed of the day after. Just wanted to ask you. So you've seen like so much fashion in your lifetime and continue to see so much. What kind of excites you at the moment?
It's an exciting moment in fashion because there's going to be something like 16 debuts in September, October, spring, summer fashion week. So I think that's exciting. It's a bit of a difficult time, honestly, but then when I think back to the last time it was really difficult, which was, around 2008 when there was the financial crash then, and so much creativity came out of that and was so exciting. I think this time is slightly different. And it's a lot of people going into established houses. But again, that's a little bit like what happened at the end of the 90s with McQueen going to Givenchy and Galliano to Dior. So I think it's an interesting moment because it's a period of change, I think. And that's something that's very exciting.
Is there one in particular that you're most excited about?
I think what Match is going to do at Chanel is the one that everyone should be excited about. And, I had people saying they thought they knew exactly what it was going to look like. I'm like, well, what he did at Margiela didn't look like what he did at Calvin Klein and doesn't look like what he did at Bottega. How amazing to get to do that and to be like, the fourth person ever to really get to tackle that. I mean, there were a few, we all kind of forget there was a bunch of people that did it at the end of the 70s and it didn't really work out before Karl. But, to be the fourth, and really, honestly, Virginie was a continuation of Karl. So it's Gabrielle Chanel, Karl Lagerfeld, Maciej Blasi being the third person really to be able to look at that. It's, what an amazing opportunity. How incredible. And that's something I'm really excited for.
I also think how people talk about it, because I often think about that as well, as like obviously fashion, we love the clothes and things, but it's a way for people to connect and communicate with each other. People that love fashion to talk about what they thought. Or I'm like, it's a cultural product for us all to sort of be less lonely around almost.
Well, the other thing that's really nice about it now as well is I think for a long time that conversation was, oh, this person's going and this person's out. I think it's very destabilizing and very damaging to be constantly talking about, oh, this person's leaving and going there and But now it's going to be great because it's actually bringing it back to the clothes and to these visions of these houses.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you about your next piece now. So this is the one that makes some people squirm, the piece that makes you feel sexy.
Yeah, this made me squirm a lot. So it's because I'm like, I don't dress to look sexy or feel sexy. This is not my kind of, it's like.
You know who else hated this one is Lauren Sherman.
Really?
He was like, I really don't want to choose anything. But she did.
I'm very sort of, I don't know, very Mrs. Prada. I'm just like, no, let's do some ugly. Let's do some conceptual clothes.
Even though her stuff is so sexy, I feel like all this must hair and I feel like it's very subversive.
I think it kind of depends on how you look at sexy. I still, one of my favorite Prada collections actually is when she did the sexy collection, which is 2002 with the transparent plastic mat. Because I've got that. Yeah. So, I love that kind of, which is like porno. It was like a and she said it's, people say I don't do sexy clothes and here's me doing sexy clothes. But I liked that. But, again, I mean, I'm very privileged. I get to talk to Mrs. Prada and she's amazing and always has amazing things to say. And I love when she's talking about things like, her hatred of cliches. And I think there is this idea that in sexiness, there's a kind of cliche, especially I think, she's talked about the kind of cliches of kind of sexy female dressing, especially red carpet, sort of, bias cut dresses and this, which I love because of the John thing.
I was going to say, with the irony being that John Galliano is so famous for his bias cut dresses.
But, she said she hates that as this kind of red carpet trope of like, that this is the way you have to look in this particular environment. This is the cliche. I always remember I talked about a Yoji show once and, and someone was saying, how can you like this? I'm like, well, sometimes you just want to look like a potato. It's very much a Ray Kawakubo Comme des Garçons thing sometimes. And how she started was it's not about the body shouldn't be the focus, and it shouldn't be, and that was, in a female perspective, it shouldn't reduce down to just your body. And when she first started Comme des Garçons, she wouldn't put mirrors in the changing rooms because she's like, it's about how you look. It should be if you feel sexy, if you feel good in these clothes, that's what's important. It's not about how you're projecting. But yeah, so the piece I chose is
it's heavy.
Yeah, it weighs a ton. I was like, what weighs so much when I brought these over? And it's this, which is a matador jacket, because I find matadors very sexy. So I've very much divorced myself from it and been like, this is what I find attractive in other people. I don't know why I find matadors attractive. Yeah, actually, I bought this on Etsy. I also kind of love that it's a tradition that still exists, and it very much connects with my love of Galliano, my love of Lacroix, has embedded in all of this sort of matador world. So yeah, that was how I tackled this question was, let's divorce myself from it and be what I find sexy in other people.
That's why I keep the category in, because I feel like so many people, it's always interesting seeing how, especially because I'm mostly interviewing creative people, how people creatively avoid the cut.
I know a lot of people who work in fashion and their partners, they find it very important that their partners are completely separate from it and not part of this kind of world.
Although, do I believe that? I feel like if someone was, I feel like you could be attracted to someone if they're really badly dressed, but then you probably would try and change. Do you know what I mean?
Well, it also depends. I also think sometimes there's a kind of fetishization of someone who's really badly dressed, that actually you're attracted to them because they're really badly dressed.
Let's talk about your final piece.
Yes.
So this is the one that got away, but it didn't get away because you've got it here with us.
Of course. But it's quite a funny story. So this is a fabulous Christian Lacroix. So this is technically his 20th anniversary collection. And it was for sale in a boutique in kind of like a vintage clothing boutique that's in the flea market in Paris. It's not like a kind of stall. It's it's zhuzhy. It's like it's a little bit fancier. And I've bought things from them before. I did a wonderful story for System Magazine, which is one of the best things I've ever been asked to write, which was they wanted me to write a story about collecting. And they were like, so we'll pay you this much money for the story and we'll give you 5,000 euros to go and buy something and write about. And I was like, this is the best thing anyone's ever asked me to do. And so I bought this Lacroix dress and wrote about the kind of the journey to find that Lacroix dress. And I came from London to Paris with my boyfriend. It was like, let's go for a lovely weekend in Paris and I'll buy this dress. Which was ulterior motive of how lovely for you.
Saw through that.
Yeah, he did. And I went there and I was like, here for this Lacroix dress. And they were like, oh, we sold that ages ago. And I was like, but it's for sale. And we had a big argument. I screamed quite a lot. Like I was very, very angry because I'd come. They were like, do you want to see anything else? I was like, no, be gone from my window. Like, very dramatic. Like literally was like, we're going home. And my boyfriend's like, no, we're staying in Paris. And was kind of heartbroken. And a lot of that, that does happen in terms of like things that got away is like, I want to buy something and then I'll kind of put it off because I'm like, oh, it's a lot of money, or do I really need it? Or shall I wait for it to be discounted a bit? And then something will go and I'll be devastated and we'll never stop talking about it. And that was the case with this. And then sort of magically, 3 months later, it just appeared again on Vestiaire. But yeah, it was one that got away in the way that many get away, but then it actually came back to me. I was literally like, oh my God, this is fate. And showing it to my boyfriend who did not care at all. Was literally like, just buy the dress and shut up. Like, you've gone on about this for years.
Does he ever advise you? Like, is he invested in the archive and the collecting process?
He is the person, and Susanna actually, who do repeatedly say, if you sold everything, you could buy a house. They're all constantly like, or even if you sold some of this, you could buy a house. And I could, but I'm not sure. I'm not kind of ready to at this point. I'm hoping I will be at some point. I don't know if I want to say I'm hoping I will be. Maybe I will be at some point. But the trouble with a lot of it is it's just like, if this goes, it's never going to come back. You know, if I get rid of this now, even if it's like, you know, if I sell that black and white dress and get £90,000 for it, it's like, okay, but if I wanted to get it again, it would cost me £150,000. You know, it's that whole thing of like, I need to be sure that I'm ready to kind of let go of all of these things. And I'm not at that point at the moment. I'm not ready to let go of things. I'm also like, you know, I could get drunk, I could take drugs, you know, I could do lots of other things. It's like, no, this is what I spend my money on. I should own a house, but I don't. And it's like, you know, and I'm kind of okay with that.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for bringing these incredible items and talking us through your threads of conversation.
Thank you.
I look forward to doing an episode 2 with a whole load of new items in a year's time.
Well, yeah, I'm sure I will have accumulated plenty.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Threads of Conversation. Hit the link in the show notes to read the accompanying newsletter. And don't forget to subscribe for more Threads of Conversation.